Hello, everyone. Happy, what is it? It's Monday, right? Happy Monday. It's been a long weekend. Doesn't look like too many people are here yet, but it also is. I feel like I can never actually see who's in the chat for some reason. My chat log never seems to display everyone. So say hi if you're here, because I might not see you otherwise. 7 o'clock. Farmhouse is here. I can see Farmhouse. I can see Farmhouse and another TV viewer again. Which another TV viewer was here last time, and I don't know if that's somebody that I know or just some kind of Twitch bot or something like that. Because, I mean, we're not really TV here. I don't know. Reading books. I remembered to turn on the microphone this time, so I'm not gonna sit here talking to nobody for a full minute and a half like last time. We still have the green lights on because we're still in the Mirkwood. What do you think? The Mirkwood or just Mirkwood? We're still in Mirkwood or we're still in the Mirkwood? I don't remember if Tolkien stuck to one way or the other in the book. Well, we'll wait a little bit, see if anyone shows up. If anyone shows up. Of course people are going to show up. We'll see if... Well, it looks like at some point within the past minute, someone else followed the channel. Series of letters and numbers. I don't know if that's somebody that I know. HOS. Haas. Haas 312 with a bunch of other zeros and stuff. Well, hello. Either way. If you're new, we've been reading The Hobbit. And we'll start that up in 7 minutes or so. Get back into it. Wait for a few more people to show up and talk about what we've read so far. Hey, it's the Sharkies! Hooray! How was your weekend? Happy Monday. My weekend seemed very long. Farmhouse and I went out to a bit of a party, all outdoors, and only people that have been vaccinated were there, I believe. But a little bit of an outdoor concert and like mostly 60s, 70s British invasion type music, mostly. And then a little bit of a barbecue. Yes, people liked Farmhouse made Mexican hot chocolate cookies. You went to the drive-in. Oh, cool. I don't know if I've ever actually gone to a drive-in. There was one very close, like, I mean, I'm assuming you went to the Starlight. I think that's what it's called. And we used to live very near by the Starlight. But I don't think I've ever actually gone. What did you see? Something good? Farmhouse and I have gone to see a couple of movies in theaters after, wait. No, nothing good? Ugh. Something bad? That's ominous. Did you see something good? No. That sounds great. Paw Patrol and Space Jam 2, double feature. That sounds like it was really good. Is Space Jam 2 bad? I hope it's not really bad. I've heard that it's a lot of just constant, like, pop culture references. Not the worst. Had to quit. Alright. I do have a little bit of a nostalgic soft spot for Space Jam, like the original Space Jam, even though, I do know it's not a great movie, but it's entertaining. Yeah, I haven't heard much about the sequel, but I have heard that it's a lot of just references to other things all the time. Did you notice that? Farmhouse has never seen a Paw Patrol. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen Paw Patrol either. I've heard a couple things about it. It was hard to place who the target audience was. This one was about on par with the first, but without as much nostalgia. Alright, that's fair. So we left off with, I believe, about 15 pages to go in Flies and Spiders, chapter 8. And we had just encountered our first spider. Well, not our very first, because when Bilbo was climbing up the tree to try and get a look at the surrounding areas, he saw many small spiders and was a little bit creeped out by those. But we encountered our very first quite large spider the last on Friday. And Bilbo was quite heroic about the whole thing and took out his sword and slayed the spider. Slew the spider? Slayed the spider? Well, either way, he killed it. and and felt a little more confident about himself. Slew, you think? Farmouse thinks it's slew. And then he named his sword Sting. Ericer! Hello! Happy Monday. How was your weekend? It sounded like you had a pretty busy weekend. We were just talking about some of the stuff we got up to. My weekend felt quite long, actually. So busy. It feels like it was a really long time since we did this on Friday for some reason. It was only a few days ago, but I feel like it's been longer than normal. Time is weird. Was it good, or was it just long? You actually did stuff. Yeah, same. But it was awesome. Oh, cool. Yeah, you went to Pride. Yes, I heard. I'm assuming you went to Chilliwack Pride, because I heard that, like, Chilliwack did its first ever, like, big Pride thing, and that it was very packed. Really good turnout. Cool. That's nice. I also heard that there was, like, one crazy cranky protester, which is much... Oh, it was the third one? Oh, okay. I People were saying it was the first, but I guess maybe they were just uninformed. Oh, okay. So maybe the biggest one then that they've done. Well, I'm glad that that was good, and I'm glad there was a good turnout. That's cool. There was a couple protesting. That said, repent. Yeah, well, you know what? Just like a couple of protesters at a Chilliwack Pride event, I think is a win. So, Bilbo named his sword. Prior to that, Bomber woke up after his dip in the stream. It was a huge improvement. That's cool. Um, and while Bomber was awake again, he had forgotten basically everything that has happened since they had the party at Bilbo's house under the hill. So, I mean, yeah, that's kind of bittersweet. There were some very negative things they went through that honestly it would probably be kind of nice to forget. Although, good to know that you survived them. But there were also some pleasant things that they went through as well that would be kind of sad to forget. So it's sort of a weird thing, a weird mix. At least, I guess he forgot all of the jokes people kept making at his expense. But unfortunately, he woke up kind of hungry and grumpy and led them on that wild chase through the woods after lights appearing and disappearing and feasts appearing and disappearing before them. And then they all got separated, or at least Bilbo got separated. Poor Bomber, yeah. Bilbo got separated, and then he fought off that spider and stuck it in the face with his sting, and that's where we're at now. And then he kind of passed right out, I believe. Oh, maybe he didn't know. He had passed out before, and then he woke up to being wrapped up by the spider, and that's when he started his fight. So we're at 10 past 7 now, so why don't we continue with the chapter? And actually get through Mirkwood, and then maybe I can think about changing the lighting in here to something a little less green. Although I don't think I have it set to the same green as before. It's not quite as spooky right now, but that could be because it's brighter outside. Hang on. Why is that light on? I've got another Mirkwoody drink. All right. So the line that we left off on was, "I will give you a name," he said to it, "and I shall call you Sting," which I think is kind of a significant line for this book and for The Lord of the Rings as well. This is the origin of Sting and why it's called that. Well, maybe not the origin, but the origin of the name Sting. After that, he set out to explore. The forest was grim and silent, but obviously he had first of all to look for his friends, who were not likely to be very far off, unless they had been made prisoners by the elves, or worse things. Bilbo felt that it was unsafe to shout, and he stood a long while wondering in what direction the path lay, and in what direction he should go first to look for the dwarves. I think that this is kind of why the forest, in some ways, is probably a little scarier than being under the mountain. In Under the Mountain, there were lots of tunnels and things, but basically you had to pick one and then follow it, versus in this forest, if you lose your way, you could go in any direction and have no idea if it's the right way or not. Anyways. "Oh, why did we not remember Bjorn's advice, and Gandalf's?" he lamented. You did remember. "What a mess we are in now." "We? I only wish it was we. It is horrible being all alone." In the end, he made as good a guess as he could at the direction from which the cries for help had come in the night, and by luck, he was born with a good share of it, he guessed more or less right, as you will see. Having made up his mind, he crept along as cleverly as he could. Hobbits are clever at quietness, especially in woods, as I have already told you. Also, Bilbo had slipped on his ring before he started. That is why the spiders neither saw nor heard him coming. Halfling luck, yeah. He had picked his way stealthily for some distance when he noticed a place of dense black shadow ahead of him, black even for the forest, like a patch of midnight that had never been cleared away. As he drew nearer, he saw that it was made by spiderwebs, one behind and over and tangled with another. Suddenly he saw, too, that there were spiders, huge and horrible, sitting in the branches above him, and ring or no ring, he trembled with fear lest they should discover him. Standing behind a tree, he watched a group of them for some time, and then, in the silence and stillness of the wood, he realized that these loathsome creatures were speaking to one another. Their voices were a sort of thin creaking and hissing, but he could make out many of the words that they said. They were talking about the dwarves. "It was a sharp struggle, but worth it," said one. "What nasty, thick skins they have, to be sure, but I'll wager there is good juice inside." "Aye, they'll make fine eating when they're hung a bit," said another. Don't hang 'em too long, said a third. They're not as fat as they might be. Been feeding none too well of late, I should guess. Kill 'em, I say, hissed a fourth. Kill 'em now and hang 'em dead for a while. They're dead now, I'll warrant, said the first. That they are not. I saw one a-struggling just now. Just coming round again, I should say. After a beautiful sleep, I'll show you. With that, one of the fat spiders ran along a rope till it came to a dozen bundles hanging in a row from a high branch. Bilbo was horrified, now that he noticed them for the first time dangling in the shadows, to see a dwarvish foot sticking out of the bottoms of some of the bundles, or here and there the tip of a nose, or a bit of beard, or of a hood. To the fattest of these bundles the spider went. It is poor old Bombur, I'll bet, thought Bilbo. Here we go again. And nipped hard at the nose that stuck out. There was a muffled yelp inside, and a toe shot up and kicked the spider straight and hard. There was life in Bombur still. There was a noise like the kicking of a flabby football, and the enraged spider fell off the branch, only catching itself with its own thread just in time. The others laughed. You were quite right, they said. The meat's alive and kicking. I'll soon put an end to that, hissed the angry spider, climbing back into the branch. Farmouse says, interesting that they're speaking a language he can understand. I guess that's a good giant spider trait. They can lure in their prey that way. Yeah, I thought that was interesting as well. Most of the other creatures that they've encountered, wargs and bears and some other things of that nature, have had their own language. With Gandalf being able to speak it. Although I suppose the giant eagles were able to speak the same tongue. I think they just call it the common tongue in that they've been communicating in. The giant eagles and the goblins have both been able to speak that, though I think the goblins also had their own language. But maybe they switched back and forth. I'm not certain about that. But the spiders, for whatever reason, speak a language that Bilbo can understand, apparently, supposedly, I guess, the common tongue. I don't know if that's just for convenience or what. Bilbo saw that the moment had come when he must do something. He could not get up at the brutes, and he had nothing to shoot with. But looking about, he saw that in this place there were many stones lying in what appeared to be a now dry little watercourse. Bilbo was a pretty fair shot with a stone, and it did not take him long to find a nice smooth egg-shaped one that fitted his hand cozily. As a boy, he used to practice throwing stones at things, until rabbits and squirrels and even birds got out of his way as quick as lightning if they saw him stoop. And even grown up, he had still spent a deal of his time at quoits. I don't know what quoits are. Dart throwing, shooting at the wand, bowls, ninepins, and other quiet games of the aiming and throwing sort. Indeed, he could do lots of things besides blowing smoke rings, asking riddles, and cooking, that I haven't had time to tell you about. There is no time now. While he was picking up stones, the spider had reached Bombur, and soon he would have been dead. At that moment, Bilbo threw. The stone struck the spider plunk on the head, and it dropped senseless off the tree, flopped to the ground with all of its legs curled up. The Sharkies say quoits is like bocce ball? I think that's how it's pronounced. Yes, that's right, with an O. The next stone went whizzing through a big web, snapping its cords and taking off the spider sitting in the middle of it. Whack! Dead! After that, there was a deal of commotion in the spider colony, and they forgot the dwarves for a bit, I can tell you. They could not see Bilbo, but they could make a good guess at the direction from which the stones were coming. As quick as lightning, they came running and swinging towards the Hobbit, flinging out their long threads in all directions, till the air seemed full of waving snares. Bilbo, however, soon slipped away to a different place. The idea came to him to lead the furious spiders further and further away from the dwarves if he could, to make them curious, excited, and angry all at once. When about 50 had gone off to the place where he had stood before, he threw some more stones at these, and at others that had stopped behind. Then, dancing among the trees, he began to sing a song to infuriate them and bring them all after him, and also to let the dwarves hear his voice. This is what he sang. Farmouse says horseshoes, she thinks, but with a ring instead of a half circle. Okay. Alright, this is what he sang. It's only a short one, I think I can manage. At least this one is in Bilbo's voice, which should be a little easier for singing. Old fat spider, spinning in a tree. Old fat spider, can't see me. Attercop, won't you stop? Stop your spinning and look for me. Old Tom Noddy, all big body. Old Tom Noddy, can't spy me. Attercop, down you drop. You'll never catch me up your tree. That's Bilbo's little spider baiting song. Not very good, perhaps, but then you must remember that he had to make it up himself on the spur of a very awkward moment. Love it. Not very good. The Sharkies say Edderkop is Norwegian for spider. That's interesting. I didn't know that. So I wonder why Tolkien used that as a mocking name. Well, and he doesn't say Edderkop. He says Atterkop. Atter. Eriker's laughing. Are you laughing at my version of the song, or are you laughing at not very good, perhaps? Alright, well. It did what he wanted anyway. As he sang, he threw some more stones and stamped. Practically all the spiders in the place came after him. Some dropped to the ground. Others raced along the branches, swung from tree to tree, or cast new ropes across the dark spaces. They made for his noise far quicker than he had expected. They were frightfully angry. Quite apart from the stones, no spider has ever liked being called Attercop, and Tom Noddy, of course, is insulting to anybody. I know I'm insulted if anybody calls me Tom Noddy. How Tolkien said it wasn't very good. Eriker says Tolkien be like, yeah, I'm sorry guys, Bilbo's song was kind of rubbish, not my fault. Yeah, it was a tricky spot. I had to make it up on the go. It's Bilbo's fault. Has anybody ever been insulted by being called Tom Noddy before? I don't know if I've seen Tom Noddy anywhere but here. I'm sorry if it's a very bad swear. I'm not aware. I'm just reading it out of the book. Oh, there's more to come. Off Bilbo scuttled to a fresh place, but several of the spiders had run now to different points in the glade where they lived and were busy spinning webs across all the spaces between the tree stems. Very soon the hobbit would be caught in a thick fence of them all around him. That, at least, was the spider's idea. Standing now in the middle of the hunting and spinning insects, come on, Bilbo plucked up his courage and began a new song. All right. Eriker says, I feel like you're going to start. The Sharkies say the whole book is supposedly written by Bilbo, so he's commenting on his own song. Yeah, that's true. In places, it kind of feels like it could be written by Bilbo, but in other places, it feels like if it was, he was doing his best to sound like it was not written by him. Like when he takes shots at himself, for example. Calling us Tom Noddy. I'll show you the word. If you can see it here. Thought that would bring it more in focus, but it went more out. Anyways, it's Tomnoddy, one word. Whatever that is. Yeah, let's see. really doesn't want to focus. I guess it's tricky. Yeah. Tom, Noddy. Tom Noddy. Farmo says, or Ericer says, good point, Sharkies. Bilbo apologizing for his own rubbish song. Farmo says, Ator Cop is apparently Old English, and Attercop was supposedly also used to mean a peevish or ill-natured person. Okay, alright. Awesome. Sharkies love etymology. Yeah, same. I do find it very interesting to learn where songs or where words come from. Which is also part of where the word cobweb comes from. Tom Noddy, yep. Tom Noddy without the hyphen. Yeah. Yeah, that's a little strange. Alright, so Bilbo plucked up his courage and began a new song. I feel like I'm stopping a lot here around here. Farmo says Tom Noddy is apparently a Scottish insult. Alright. Lazy Lob and Crazy Cob are weaving webs to wind me. I am far more sweet than other meat, but still they cannot find me. Here I am, naughty little fly, you are fat and lazy. You cannot trap me, though you try, in your cobwebs crazy. Lazy Lob and Crazy Cob. With that, he turned and found that the last space between two tall trees had been closed with a web. But luckily, not a proper web. Only great strands of double-thick spider rope run hastily backwards and forwards from trunk to trunk. Out came his little sword. He slashed the threads to pieces and went off singing. The spiders saw the sword, though I don't suppose they knew what it was, and at once the whole lot of them came hurrying after the hobbit along the ground and the branches, hairy legs waving, nippers and spinners snapping, eyes popping full of froth and rage. They followed him into the forest until Bilbo had gone as far as he dared. Then, quieter than a mouse, he stole back. He had precious little time, he knew, before the spiders were disgusted and came back to their trees where the dwarves were hung. In the meantime, he had to rescue them. The worst part of the job was getting up onto the long branch where the bundles were dangling. I don't suppose he would have managed it if a spider had not luckily left a rope hanging down. With its help, though it stuck to his hand and hurt him, he scrambled up, only to meet an old, slow, wicked, fat-bodied spider who had remained behind to guard the prisoners, and had been busy pinching them to see which was the juiciest to eat. It had thought of starting the feast while the others were away, but Mr. Baggins was in a hurry, and before the spider knew what was happening, it felt his sting, and rolled off the branch, dead. Bilbo's next job was to loose a dwarf. What was he to do? If he cut the string which hung him up, the wretched dwarf would tumble thump to the ground a good way below. Wriggling along the branch, which made all the poor dwarves dance and dangle like ripe fruit, he reached the first bundle. Feely or Keely, he thought by the tip of a blue hood sticking out at the top. Most likely Feely. He thought by the tip of a long nose poking out of the winding threads. He managed by leaning over to cut most of the strong sticky threads that bound him round, and then, sure enough, with a kick and a struggle, most of Feely emerged. I am afraid Bilbo actually laughed at the sight of him jerking his stiff arms and legs as he danced on the spider string under his armpits, just like one of those funny toys bobbing on a wire. Mean. Somehow or other, Feely was got onto the branch, and then he did his best to help the hobbit, although he was feeling very sick and ill from the spider poison, and from hanging most of the night and the next day, wound round and round with only his nose to breathe through. It took him ages to get the beastly stuff out of his eyes and eyebrows, and as for his beard, he had to cut most of it off. Well, between them, they started to haul up first one dwarf and then another and slash them free. None of them were better off than Feely, and some of them were worse. Some had hardly been able to breathe at all, Long noses are sometimes useful, you see, and some had been more poisoned. In this way, they rescued Keely, Biffer, Boffer, Dory, and Nori. Poor old Bomber was so exhausted, he was the fattest and had been constantly pinched and poked, that he just rolled off the branch and fell plop onto the ground, fortunately onto leaves, and lay there. But there were still 5 dwarves hanging at the end of the branch when the spiders began to come back, more full of rage than ever. Bilbo immediately went to the end of the branch nearest the tree trunk and kept back those that crawled up. He had taken off his ring when he rescued Feely and forgotten to put it on again, so now they all began to splutter and hiss. "Now we see you, you nasty little creature! We will eat you and leave your bones and skin hanging on a tree. Ugh, he's got a sting, has he? Well, we'll get him all the same, and then we'll hang him head downwards for a day or 2. While this was going on, the other dwarves were working at the rest of the captives and cutting at the threads with their knives. Soon all would be free, though it was not clear what would happen after that. The spiders had caught them pretty easily the night before, but that had been unawares and in the dark. This time there looked like being a horrible battle. Suddenly, Bilbo noticed that some of the spiders had gathered round old Bomber on the floor, and had tied him up again and were dragging him away. He gave a shout and slashed at the spiders in front of him. They quickly gave way, and he scrambled and fell down the tree right into the middle of those on the ground. His little sword was something new in the way of stings for them. How it darted to and fro! It shone with delight as he stabbed at them. 6 were killed before the rest drew off and left Bomber to Bilbo. "Come down! Come down!" he shouted to the dwarves on the branch. "Don't stay up there and be netted!" For he saw spiders swarming up all the neighboring trees and crawling along the boughs over the heads of the dwarves. Down the dwarves scrambled, or jumped, or dropped, 11 all in a heap, most of them very shaky and little use on their legs. There they were at last, 12 of them counting poor old Bomber, who was being propped up on either side by his cousin Biffer and his brother Boffer. And Bilbo was dancing about and waving his sting, and hundreds of angry spiders were goggling at them all round and about and above. It looked pretty hopeless. Then the battle began. Some of the dwarves had knives, and some had sticks, and all of them could get at stones, and Bilbo had his elvish dagger. Again and again the spiders were beaten off, and many of them were killed. But it could not go on for long. Bilbo was nearly tired out. Only 4 of the dwarves were able to stand firmly, and soon they would all be overpowered like weary flies. Already the spiders were beginning to weave their webs all round them again from tree to tree. In the end, Bilbo could think of no plan except to let the dwarves into the secret of his ring. He was rather sorry about it, but it could not be helped. "I am going to disappear," he said. "I shall draw the spiders off if I can, and you must keep together and make in the opposite direction. To the left there, that is more or less the way towards the place where we last saw the elf fires." It was difficult to get them to understand, what with their dizzy heads and the shouts and the whacking of sticks and the throwing of stones, but at last Bilbo felt he could delay no longer. The spiders were drawing their circle ever closer. He suddenly slipped on his ring, and to the great astonishment of the dwarves, he vanished. Soon there came the sound of Lazy Lob and Addercop from among the trees away on the right. That upset the spiders greatly. They stopped advancing, and some went off in the direction of the voice. Addercop made them so angry that they lost their wits. Then Balin, who had grasped Bilbo's plan better than the rest, led an attack. The dwarves huddled together in a knot, and sending a shower of stones, they drove at the spiders on the left and burst through the ring. Away behind them now, the shouting and singing suddenly stopped. Hoping desperately that Bilbo had not been caught, the dwarves went on. Not fast enough, though. They were sick and weary, and they could not go much better than a hobble and a wobble, though many of the spiders were close behind. Every now and then they had to turn and fight the creatures that were overtaking them, and already some spiders were in the trees above them and throwing down their long clinging threads. Things were looking pretty bad again, when suddenly Bilbo reappeared and charged into the astonished spiders unexpectedly from the side. "Go on! Go on!" he shouted. "I will do the stinging!" That's my favorite line in the book. And he did. He darted backwards and forward, slashing at spider threads, hacking at their legs, and stabbing at their fat bodies if they came too near. The spiders swelled with rage, and spluttered and frothed, and hissed out horrible curses, but they had become mortally afraid of Sting, and dared not come very near, now that it had come back. So, curse as they would, their prey moved slowly but steadily away. It was a most terrible business, and seemed to take hours. But at last, just when Bilbo felt that he could not lift his hand for a single stroke more, the spiders suddenly gave it up, and followed them no more, but went back disappointed to their dark colony. Let's see what people are saying at this point. Sharky say there's a Netflix kids cartoon with a character named Noddy. I don't know if calling him Tom would be an insult. Is he Scottish? The Sharky say nope. Apparently the show is of French-British origin. This is a very gross, creepy bit. Sharkies wonder how big the spiders were that they could take on 100 of them. Certainly they couldn't have been shelob-sized. No, and if I recall correctly, which I may not, but I think it might be established that these are the children of Shelob. Farmhouse thinks maybe like big dog-sized. Maybe like small pony, which, remember, is still very large to a hobbit. But yes, there are many of these spiders, more than I remembered. For some reason, I was only thinking there were a few of them, but there were quite a lot here. The dwarves then noticed that they had come to the edge of a ring where elf fires had been. Whether it was one of those they had seen the night before, they could not tell. But it seemed that some good magic lingered in such spots, which the spiders did not like. At any rate, here the light was greener, and the boughs less thick and threatening, and they had a chance to rest and draw breath. There they lay for some time, puffing and panting, but very soon they began to ask questions. They had to have the whole vanishing business carefully explained, and the finding of the ring interested them so much that for a while they forgot their own troubles. Balin, in particular, insisted on having the Gollum story, riddles and all, told all over again, with the ring in its proper place. But after a time the light began to fail, and then other questions were asked. Where were they? And where was their path? And where was there any food? And what were they going to do next? These questions they asked over and over again, and it was from little Bilbo that they seemed to expect to get the answers. From which you can see that they had changed their opinion of Mr. Baggins very much, and had begun to have a great respect for him, as Gandalf had said they would. Indeed, they really expected him to think of some wonderful plan for helping them, and were not merely grumbling. They knew only too well that they would have all been dead if it had not been for the Hobbit, and they thanked him many times. That's nice, actually getting thanks. Some of them even got up and bowed right to the ground before him, though they fell over with the effort and could not get on their legs again for some time. Knowing the truth about the vanishing did not lessen their opinion of Bilbo at all, for they saw that he had some wits as well as luck and a magic ring, and all three are very useful possessions. In fact, they praised him so much that Bilbo began to feel there really was something of a bold adventurer about himself after all, though he would have felt a lot bolder still if there had been anything to eat. But there was nothing at all, and none of them were fit to go and look for anything, or to search for the lost path. The lost path! No other idea would come into Bilbo's tired head. He just sat, staring in front of him at the endless trees, and after a while they all fell silent again. All except Balin. Long after the others had stopped talking and shut their eyes, he kept on muttering and chuckling to himself. Gollum. Well, I'm blessed. So that's how he sneaked past me, is it? Now I know. Just crept quietly along, did you, Mr. Baggins? Buttons all over the doorstep. Good old Bilbo. Bilbo, Bilbo, bo, bo, bo. And then he fell asleep, and there was complete silence for a long while. All of a sudden, Dwalin opened an eye, and looked round at them. Where is Thorin? He asked. It was a terrible shock. Of course, there were only 13 of them, 12 dwarves and the Hobbit. Where indeed was Thorin? They wondered what evil fate had befallen him, magic or dark monsters, and shuddered as they lay lost in the forest. There they dropped off one by one into uncomfortable sleep full of horrible dreams, as evening wore to black night. And there we must leave them for the present, too sick and weary to set guards or to take turns at watching. We haven't quite finished the chapter yet. Farmos, Eriker says, very large for a spider. Farmos says, yeah, if they're having whole dwarves as prey, they're bigger than the ones we have, at least in North America. The Sharkies say, maybe just a lot of Australian bird-eating tarantulas. Farmos says, and there's a lot of African and South American jungles that aren't fully explored. Eriker says, that sounds like a nickname my mum would make up for Bilbo. Which one? Bilbo Bobo? I'm not sure when you said that. Farmos was wondering about the 12 dwarves thing. Yeah, that's right. They did mention before that, yeah, Bilbo Bobo Bo. Bilbo Bobo Bobo. Who's a good Bilbo Bobo Bo? But yes, when they were counting them falling out of the tree before, it did not quite add up. Farmos says that does sound like your mom. Alright. Thorin had been caught much faster than they had. You remember Bilbo falling like a log into sleep as he stepped into a circle of light? The next time, it had been Thorin who stepped forward, and as the lights went out, he fell like a stone, enchanted. All the noise of the dwarves lost in the night, their cries as the spiders caught them and bound them, and all the sounds of the battle the next day had passed over him unheard. Then the Wood Elves had come to him, and bound him and carried him away. Wood Elves. The feasting people were Wood Elves, of course. Alright, well there we have it. It was actually Wood Elves feasting in those circles, and it wasn't just an enchantment entirely. These are not wicked folk. If they have a fault, it is distrust of strangers. Though their magic was strong, even in those days they were wary. They differed from the High Elves of the West, and were more dangerous and less wise. For most of them, together with their scattered relations in the hills and mountains, were descended from the ancient tribes that never went to ferry in the West. That's interesting. There the Light Elves and the Deep Elves and the Sea Elves went and lived for ages, and grew fairer and wiser and more learned, and invented their magic and their cunning craft in the making of beautiful and marvelous things, before some came back into the wide world. In the wide world, the Wood Elves lingered in the twilight of our sun and moon, but loved best the stars, and they wandered in the great forests that grew tall in lands that are now lost. They dwelt most often by the edges of the woods, from which they could escape at times to hunt, or to ride and run over the open lands by moonlight or starlight, and after the coming of men, they took ever more and more to the gloaming and the dusk. Still, elves they were and remain, and that is good people. In a great cave, some miles within the edge of Mirkwood on its eastern side, I should say before I go further, I'm going to come back to this part because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here. Oh, something's happening here. Take that, Legolas. Less wise, very diplomatic. Elves is good people, yeah. In a great cave some miles within the edge of Mirkwood, on its eastern side, there lived at this time their greatest king. Before his huge doors of stone, a river ran out of the heights of the forest and flowed on and out into the marshes at the feet of the high wooded lands. This great cave, from which countless smaller ones opened out on every side, wound far underground and had many passages and wide halls, but it was lighter and more wholesome than any goblin dwelling, and neither so deep nor so dangerous. In fact, the subjects of the king mostly lived and hunted in the open woods, and had houses or huts on the ground and in the branches. The beeches were their favorite trees. The king's cave was his palace, and the strong place of his treasure, and the fortress of his people against their enemies. It was also the dungeon of his prisoners. So to the cave they dragged Thorin, not too gently, for they did not love dwarves, and thought he was an enemy. In ancient days they had had wars with some of the dwarves, whom they accused of stealing their treasure. It is only fair to say that the dwarves gave a different account, and said that they only took what was their due, for the elf king had bargained with them to shape his raw gold and silver, and had afterwards refused to give them their pay. If the elf king had a weakness, it was for treasure, especially for silver and white gems. Though his hoard was rich, he was ever eager for more, since he had not yet as great a treasure as other elf lords of old. His people neither mined nor worked metal or jewels, nor did they bother much with trade or with tilling the earth. All this was well known to every dwarf, though Thorin's family had nothing to do with the old quarrel I have spoke of. Consequently, Thorin was angry at their treatment of him, when they took their spell off him and he came to his senses, and also he was determined that no word of gold or jewels should be dragged out of him. The king looked sternly on Thorin when he was brought before him, and asked him many questions, but Thorin would only say that he was starving. "Why did you and your folk 3 times try to attack my people at their merrymaking?" asked the king. "We did not attack them," answered Thorin. "We came to beg because we were starving." "Where are your friends now, and what are they doing?" "I don't know, but I expect starving in the forest." "What were you doing in the forest?" "Looking for food and drink, because we were starving." "But what brought you into the forest at all?" asked the king angrily. At that, Thorin shut his mouth and would not say another word. "Very well," said the king. "Take him away and keep him safe until he feels inclined to tell the truth, even if he waits 100 years. Then the elves put thongs on him and shut him in one of the inmost caves with strong wooden doors, and left him. They gave him food and drink, plenty of both, if not very fine, for Wood Elves were not goblins, and were reasonably well behaved even to their worst enemies when they captured them. The giant spiders were the only living thing that they had no mercy upon. There in the king's dungeon poor Thorin lay, and after he had got over his thankfulness for bread and meat and water, he began to wonder what had become of his unfortunate friends. It was not very long before he discovered, but that belongs to the next chapter, and the beginning of another adventure in which the Hobbit again showed his usefulness. And that's the end, finally, of chapter 8. We won't start it today, but the next chapter, chapter 9, is called Barrels Out of Bond. And here's a little preview. Once again, I'll wait here. Maybe if I hide, it'll focus better. Maybe not. I'll just complain about it every time. Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe it's something to do with the light, but it doesn't seem to want to focus very much today. But we have here an image of a bunch of barrels slipping down a stream, which the Sharkies have mentioned is one of their one of the chapters they enjoy. I think maybe that was John. So let's see what people were saying after Elves is good people. Tolkien likes pointing out characters' weaknesses. Yeah, that's true. Which Farmo says is nice, good character development. It is, I think, easy to fall into the trap of only saying like positive things about a character, and then you don't necessarily get all of the details. Farmos, but what were you? Hungry. How many thongs? I am impressed that you guys didn't make more thong jokes. Good job. And yet, I'm guessing here they come. Barrels! Barrels! Everybody's talking about barrels. Try moving the... Oh, yes. Erica loves that chapter, the barrels chapter. I can try holding it back a bit. Is this easier to see? Maybe if I slowly... It's a little bit. It's kind of going in and out a bit, but... It's not, the most interesting out of all the pictures we've had. Maybe if I hold it really close. Really close. Way up there. Maybe not. Well, hopefully you get the idea. There's not a whole lot of details. We've got roots on either side of a stream, a little grate, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 barrels that I can see coming down the stream. I wonder why that might be. So there were some interesting details happening in this chapter, mostly towards the end there when they started talking about elves. And some stuff here that definitely, those who wrote details for elves later on in Dungeons and Dragons must have looked at. Because here we have a distinction between different types of elves, and I think more of a distinction than I remember from a lot of Lord of the Rings. I remember there being a difference between high elves and wood elves, which they do actually name here, high elves versus wood elves. But then we've got light elves, which is an interesting one. I'm not certain which that would be related to in D&D. I can think of one that it might be, but I can't remember the name off the top of my head. I've always thought of them as being a little more like fairy-like elves. And then they mentioned deep elves, which I can take a guess at what the deep elves are. Drow or dark elves in Dungeons and Dragons. And then sea elves, which I wonder, they only say sea elves here. They don't say much about them except that they... Oh, and that's another thing. They mention them, a lot of these, going away to... It just says fairy in the west. It's spelled capital F-A-E-R-I-E in the west. So I guess... Yeah, that's an interesting thing. And then it kind of mentions that some of them came back from fairy in the west into the wide world, which is capitalized as well. And I guess the wood elves remained here and were, I guess, a little bit more savage. I don't know. Less wise, as he says, but more dangerous. Yeah, the going to the west thing. That's definitely a thing. The boats. They ride the... No, I think it gets named. I don't remember it being called fairy, though. Sharky say more historical exposition than we've had in a while. Yeah, and I do appreciate that, and I feel like his writing style, I think, is maybe changing or developing a little bit as this book goes on. Farmos thought it was something with a V. Yeah, Val something. I don't remember at the moment. Kind of sounds like it's suggesting the Wood Elves don't go there. Well, or at least that they didn't in the past. Yeah, it kind of sounds like they in the past, some of the light elves and the deep elves and the sea elves went to fairy, um, and I guess sort of developed their culture and their magic and their crafting, and then some of them came back. And the sea elves, I wonder whether that's elves that live by the sea or elves that live under the sea. I wonder, because I think in Dungeons and Dragons it's more the latter. It's you get the like underwater elves that are kind of like merfolk, but I think a little bit different. But I wonder what the difference is with sea elves here. I wonder if they're just coastal elves. Farmos feels like she remembers something about them going away and coming back in the like different ages, 1 or 2. I haven't actually read through the Silmarillion myself. I've heard a lot of details from it, and I know there's a lot of sort of information in there, but I don't know that it's very much of a story. I think it's more of just kind of a compilation of notes. The Sharkies once heard somewhere that Tolkien based some of the structure of the 2 types of elves on Icelandic High Elves and Welsh Wood Elves in terms of how languages and cultures change. That would be interesting. Yeah, was there anything else here? We've got some information about we've got the details of some conflict between the Wood Elves and the Dwarves. Farmos is sure she viewed a brief history of the ages at one point. Yeah, some of that stuff is quite interesting, but I do think I prefer like a condensed version of it where I can just pick out the interesting details without going through the like lineage of everybody's individual ancestors and things like that. But yes, the history of the conflict between the Wood Elves and the Dwarves is also kind of interesting. How the Wood Elves feel that they were stolen from by the Dwarves, whereas the Dwarves feel that they were promised payment that they did not receive. Valinor. Wait, Valinor I thought were... Is Valinor the place, or are... Because what... There's like sort of a type of like almost angelic type of being in this world that now I'm getting the name confused. Maybe it had a similar name. Farmos thinks Valinor is the place. At some point I'm going to have to do some studying of all these details. But yes, the conflict between dwarves and elves, and how the elf lord likes... I think it sounded like silver and white jewels. So I think silver metals and white jewels is what it was. It's kind of weird. It says he has a weakness for treasure, especially for silver and white gems. So I don't know if that's silver metal and white gems, or if that's silver and white gems. Ah, the Valar. Yes, Valar are the people. Which is probably, I would guess that those 2 words, Valinor and Valar, are probably linked one from the other. Yes, the Valar is a very interesting set of details. Jonathan is thumbing through the Silmarillion right now. I hope I'm not butchering the way that's supposed to be said, the Silmarillion. That's just how I read it. Oh, yeah. Someone once challenged. Stephen Colbert's Middle-earth trivia challenges are all pretty interesting. Like, assuming that that's all legitimate, his answers are pretty... Yeah, he named like all of them, I think. He named like every single one. The Those are pretty entertaining. If you haven't seen that, you should like look up on YouTube or something Stephen Colbert and like Lord of the Rings trivia or Tolkien trivia, something like that. There's a few different videos because people, got wind that he is apparently a huge fan of Tolkien's writing, and like more so than I am because, well, or at least a different type than I am because he knows some intense details. There was one recently where he got stumped. Oh, intriguing. Was it one that was like really specific? Because I remember there was one where someone like asked him like a page number or something like that. And I feel like that's kind of unfair. By the actors for Merry and Pippin. That's great. I appreciate that I haven't heard anything negative about any of the actors from Lord of the Rings. They all seem like pretty cheerful people, one way or another. So we are finally going to be getting out of Mirkwood, or at least into a different part of it for a bit. So I can change the lighting. It was the name of something in Lord of the Rings, not a page number. All right. That's interesting. Ericer saw James Franco challenge him. Yeah. What color? Let's see. Hey Google, set computer room lights to warm red. Let's see what that does.
Sorry, I don't know how to help with that.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
Other things you can try.
No, I don't want other things I can try. What color should I set the lights to? How about orange? Hey Google. What? Farmhouse, did you do that?
I've spent some time looking at pictures of coral reefs.
What?
Something about them makes me happy. I can't believe the Great Barrier Reef is over 500,000 years old.
Google's telling me about coral reefs right now. And that the Great Barrier Reef is over 5,000 years old. I don't know where that came from. Farmhouse did it. Farmhouse thinks that the James Franco challenge may have been the Valar one. The AI just wants to be loved. Yeah. Oh boy. I've been playing through Horizon Zero Dawn, and let me tell you, the AI in that does not want to be loved. That game gets a little grim at some parts. The story's pretty interesting, though. Well, it is now after 8 o'clock, so I think this has been pretty good, and I think we're at a good part for the next chapter. Oh, and there goes the dishwasher, even more computer stuff happening. It's just everything, all the machines are telling me it's time to stop. So I better listen. I have one more drink before we go. And Farmhouse is quoting GLaDOS from Portal. It's a great game. Anyways, we dealt with many spiders. I hope nobody got too spooked by that. But we appear to have escaped them, at least for now. The elves don't like the spiders either. And come Friday, I guess, we will get to seeing more of the Wood Elves and any problems we might have with them. Look forward to, I think, a little bit more of a fun chapter rather than a harrowing one. This past chapter has been somewhat frightening. All right, well, have a good week, everyone. I hope everyone is looking forward to Friday. And I'll see you all then. Have a good night. Enjoy your week. Bye.